The morning sun was already hot when Harold Martinez pulled his old pickup truck into the dusty parking lot of Millerville Auction House. At 73 years old, Harold had seen enough livestock auctions to know exactly what to expect. The smell of hay mixed with diesel fuel, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, and the chatter of farmers catching up on local gossip before the bidding started. Harold wasn't planning to buy anything that day. His ranch was long gone, sold 3 years ago when his wife Martha passed away and the work became too much for his aging body. These days, his small pension check had to stretch to cover everything from groceries to his heart medication. But old habits die hard, and Thursday mornings at the auction had been part of his routine for over 40 years. He grabbed his worn cowboy hat from the passenger seat and made his way toward the main building. The gravel crunched under his boots as he nodded to familiar faces along the way. Most of the men here had been coming to these auctions as long as he had. They were getting older too, moving a little slower, but still showing up every week like clockwork, and inside the auction house Harold found his usual spot on the wooden bleachers. The metal folding chair he always sat in had a small dent from years of use. He pulled out his thermos of coffee and settled in to watch the proceedings. The first few lots were cattle, mostly young steers heading to feedlots. Nothing too interesting, just the usual business of farming life. But then something changed in the atmosphere. Harold noticed it first in the way the regular buyers started shifting in their seats. The kill buyers had arrived. These weren't the local ranchers he knew. These were the men who bought animals by the pound, loaded them into trucks, and hauled them off to slaughter facilities. Harold had nothing against them personally, but he knew what their presence meant for the horses that would come up later, in the auction. The auctioneer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "All right, folks, we're moving into the horse lots now. First up is lot number 45, a gelding about 12 years old." Harold watched as a thin brown horse was led into the ring. The animal looked tired, his head hanging low. The bidding was quick and businesslike. One of the kill buyers raised his paddle, then another. Within minutes, the horse was sold and led away. Harold felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. 2 more horses came and went the same way. Then the gate opened again and lot number 47 was led into the ring. Harold felt his breath catch in his throat. It was a mare, probably a bay from what he could see under the dust and neglect. But what stopped him cold was her condition. She was heavily pregnant, her belly swollen and hanging low. Her ribs showed clearly through her dull coat, and her hip bones jutted out sharply. Someone had let this animal get dangerously thin while she was carrying a foal. The mare stood in, the center of the ring trembling slightly. Her ears flicked back and forth, and Harold could see the whites of her eyes as she looked around at the crowd. There was something about her expression that reminded him of his old cowdog when she was scared during thunderstorms. This horse knew something bad was about to happen. The auctioneer started his familiar chant. "Here we have a pregnant mare, folks. She's carrying, as you can see. What am I bid?" Harold looked around the crowd and felt sick. The kill buyers were the only ones showing interest. Their paddles were ready, and he could see them calculating weights and prices in their heads. The mare might be thin, but she was still a large animal, and the unborn foal would add to the total weight. The bidding started low, as it always did with the kill buyers. $50, then $75. The numbers climbed slowly but steadily. Harold gripped his coffee thermos tighter, his knuckles turning white. He tried to tell himself this wasn't his problem. He was retired. He lived in a small house in town now, not on a ranch where he could care for animals. His monthly budget was already stretched thin, but he couldn't take his eyes off the mare. She was young, probably not even 10 years old. Someone had bred her, then apparently decided she wasn't worth the cost of proper feed. Now she was going to pay the ultimate price for human neglect. Her foal would never take its first breath, never feel the sun on its back, never run through a pasture with its mother. The bidding reached $200. Harold could see the mare's sides heaving with each breath. The stress of being in the ring, surrounded by strangers and strange smells, was clearly taking its toll on her pregnant body. $300. Harold found himself thinking about Martha. His wife had always been the one with the soft heart for animals. She'd been the one to bring home stray cats, to insist they keep the runt piglet that the other farmers said would never survive. She'd been gone for 3 years now, but Harold could almost hear her voice in his ear. That mare has got spirit in her eyes, Harold. Look past the poor condition and see the horse underneath. $400. The auctioneer was getting excited now. This was more than most of the horses had brought that day. But Harold knew it wasn't excitement about finding the mare a good home. It was just business. Dollars per pound. Nothing more. Harold looked at the mare again. She had stopped trembling and was standing straighter now, as if she was gathering her courage. Her head came up slightly, and for just a moment, their eyes met across the dusty arena. In that instant, Harold saw something that made his chest tighten. This wasn't just a broken-down old horse. This was a mother, fighting for her unborn baby's life the only way she knew how, by standing tall and refusing to give up. The bidding hit $500. Harold could feel his heart pounding in his chest. His doctor had told him to avoid stress, to take things easy in his retirement. But nothing about this situation felt easy. The mare's eyes found his again, and Harold felt something shift inside him. $600. The kill buyers were getting serious now. Harold could see one of them checking his phone, probably calculating profit margins and transport costs. The mare would be on a truck heading to slaughter before the sun went down. Her foal would never have a chance. Harold thought about his bank account. His Social Security check was barely enough to cover his own needs. The house payment, utilities, groceries, medications. There wasn't room in his budget for a horse, let alone a pregnant one who would need veterinary care and special feed. It would be financial suicide. $700. The auctioneer was looking around the crowd now, trying to squeeze out every last dollar. Do I hear $750? $750 anywhere? Harold's hand started to tremble. He looked down at his weathered fingers, still strong despite his age. These hands had delivered calves in the middle of winter storms. They'd held dying animals and helped birth healthy ones. They'd comforted Martha during her final illness and signed the papers to sell the ranch when he could no longer manage it alone. The mare stamped one hoof impatiently, and Harold looked up to see her watching him again. There was something in her expression that reminded him of the look Martha used to give him when she was trying to convince him to do the right thing, even when it wasn't the easy thing. $750. Do I hear $750? The auctioneer called out. Harold felt his chest tighten. The mare was running out of time. In a few seconds, the hammer would fall, and she would belong to the kill buyers. Her story would end before her full story could even begin. Going once at $700. Harold's mind raced. What would Martha say if she were here? What would she do? He already knew the answer. Martha would have had her hand up before the bidding even started. Going twice at $700? The mare's ears pricked forward, pointed directly at Harold. It was as if she was asking him a question. Are you going to help me, or are you going to let me die? Harold felt something break loose inside his chest. All his careful retirement planning, all his worries about money and budgets and living on a fixed income, suddenly seemed less important than the life of this one pregnant horse and her unborn foal. His hand shot up into the air before he even realized he was moving. $800! Harold called out, his voice carrying clearly across the arena. The auction house fell silent for a moment. Heads turned in his direction. The kill buyers looked annoyed. The auctioneer looked surprised but pleased. Have 800. Do I hear 850? Harold held his breath. 800 was more than the kill buyers usually wanted to pay. It cut too deeply into their profit margins, but would it be enough? One of the kill buyers started to raise his paddle, then seemed to think better of it. He shook his head and lowered his hand. The other buyers followed suit. 800 going. Once, going twice, sold to bidder number 37. Harold sat in stunned silence as the gavel fell. The mare was his. He had just spent $800 he didn't really have on a pregnant horse he had nowhere to keep. Martha would have been proud. She also would have called him a fool. Probably both at the same time. As the mare was led out of the ring, she turned her head one more time to look at Harold. This time her ears were forward and relaxed. There was something different in her eyes now. Not fear or desperation, but something that might have been hope. Harold made his way down to the payment window on unsteady legs. His hands shook as he wrote out the check. $800 plus the auction fees. Nearly $1,000 gone in the space. The drive home from the auction house felt like the longest 20 minutes of Harold's life. Every bump in the road made him wince, thinking about the pregnant mare in his trailer. He kept checking his rearview mirror, watching for any sign of distress. The mare, who he had already started thinking of as Hope, seemed to be handling the ride better than he was. Harold's small house sat on 2 acres just outside the town limits. It wasn't much compared to the 160 acres he used to own, but it had been perfect for a retired widower. Now, as he pulled into his driveway, Harold realized he was about to face his first major problem. He had bought a horse, but he didn't have anywhere proper to keep her. The previous owners had kept a few chickens, so there was a small shelter and a fenced area behind the house, but it was nothing like what a pregnant mare would need. The fence was only about 4 feet high, and the shelter was barely big enough for a few chickens, let alone a full-grown horse. Harold parked his truck and sat for a moment, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. What had he done? At his age, with his limited income, he had just taken on a responsibility that could easily overwhelm him. The veterinary bills alone could eat up his entire savings. And if there were complications with the birth? He shook his head, trying to push away the doubts. Hope was depending on him now. He had made his choice at the auction, and there was no going back. Harold got out of the truck and walked around to the back of the trailer. Through the small window, he could see Hope standing calmly inside. Her head was low, but her ears were forward, listening to the sounds of her new environment. When she saw Harold's face at the window, she nickered softly. "Easy, girl," Harold murmured. "We're home now. It's not much, but it's safe." Opening the trailer door, Harold was relieved to see that Hope was standing steady on her feet. The ride hadn't been too hard on her, though he could see she was tired. He clipped the lead rope to her halter and helped her back down the ramp. Hope stood quietly while Harold looked around his property with new eyes. The small paddock would have to do for now, but he would need to make it bigger and stronger. The shelter would need to be expanded too. And he would need to call Dr. Peterson, the only large animal vet in the county, to come take a look at Hope as soon as possible. As if reading his thoughts, Hope turned her head to look at Harold. There was something trusting in her expression that made his chest tight. This horse was putting her faith in him, trusting him to take care of her and her unborn foal. It was a responsibility Harold hadn't felt since Martha got sick. He led Hope to the small paddock and opened the gate. The mare walked inside and immediately began to explore her new surroundings. She sniffed at the ground, tested the fence with her nose, and investigated the little chicken shelter. Her movements were slow and careful, but Harold could see intelligence in everything she did. Harold filled a bucket with fresh water from the garden hose and set it inside the paddock. Hope came over immediately and began to drink. She was thirsty, which wasn't surprising given her condition. Harold made a mental note to keep the water bucket full at all times. The next challenge was food. Harold had exactly 1 bale of hay left over from when he used to keep a few goats. It was old and not the best quality, but it would have to do until he could get to the feed store. He broke open the bale and spread the hay around the paddock. Hope began eating immediately, and Harold was encouraged to see her appetite was good. As the afternoon wore on, Harold found himself standing by the fence just watching Hope. She was still painfully thin, and her coat was rough and dull. But there was something about her presence that filled an empty space in Harold's life that he hadn't even realized was there. When Martha was alive, there had always been animals around. She had insisted on keeping a few chickens for eggs, a couple of goats for milk, and there was always at least 1 barn cat around to keep the mice away. After Martha died, Harold had found homes for all the animals. The house had felt too quiet, too empty. Now, with Hope quietly munching hay just outside his kitchen window, the place felt alive again. That evening, Harold sat at his kitchen table with a calculator and a pile of bills. The reality of his situation was becoming clear, and it wasn't pretty. His monthly Social Security check was $1,200. His house payment was $400, Utilities ran about $150. Groceries were usually around $300, and his medications cost him $200 a month. That left him with barely enough for gas, clothing, and the occasional dinner out with his old ranching buddies. Now he was going to need horse feed, veterinary care, and supplies to fix up his property. Harold did some rough calculations in his head. Good horse feed would cost at least $60 a month, probably more for a pregnant mare who needed extra nutrition. A vet visit would be at least $200, and that was assuming Hope didn't have any serious problems. Harold pushed the calculator away and rubbed his tired eyes. By any reasonable measure, he couldn't afford this horse. But every time he looked out the window and saw Hope standing peacefully in the paddock, he knew he couldn't have made any other choice. He thought about Martha and what she would say about his situation. She had always been the practical one in their marriage, the one who balanced the checkbook and worried about money. But she had also been the one who insisted they help animals in need, even when times were tight. "You can't put a price on doing the right thing," she used to say. "The money will work itself out somehow." Harold hoped she was right. The next morning, Harold was up before dawn. His first stop was the feed store in town, where he bought 4 bales of good alfalfa hay and a bag of grain specifically formulated for pregnant mares. The total came to $87, and Harold felt a pang as he handed over the money. But Hope needed proper nutrition if she was going to deliver a healthy foal. Back home, Harold was pleased to see that Hope had eaten most of the old hay he had given her the night before. Her water bucket was nearly empty, too, which was a good sign. Pregnant mares needed plenty of fresh water. Harold gave Hope fresh hay and a small portion of the grain. She ate eagerly, and Harold could swear he saw a little more brightness in her eyes already. It was probably his imagination, but it made him feel better anyway. His next task was calling Dr. Peterson to schedule a vet visit. Harold had known Bill Peterson for 20 years, back when Harold still had his ranch. Bill was getting close to retirement himself, but he was still the best large animal vet in 3 counties. "Harold Martinez," Bill's voice crackled over the phone. "Haven't heard from you since you sold the ranch. What can I do for you?" "Well, Bill, I've got myself into a situation here," Harold began, and told him about buying Hope at the auction. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Harold, you know I think the world of you, but are you sure you know what you're getting into? A pregnant rescue mare can be a real challenge, even for someone with your experience." "I know it's crazy, Bill, but I couldn't let her go to the kill buyers. She's got spirit and her foal deserves a chance." Bill sighed. "All right, I'll come take a look at her this afternoon. But Harold, I want you to be prepared for what I might find. A mare in that condition could have all sorts of problems, and if she loses the foal, or if there are complications during delivery—" "I understand," Harold said quietly. "Just come take a look at her, and we'll go from there." After hanging up the phone, Harold spent the morning working on the paddock fence. He drove to the hardware store and bought fence posts and wire, spending another $120 he couldn't really afford. But the fence needed to be taller and stronger if Hope was going to stay safe. Harold hadn't done physical work like this in years, and by lunchtime his back was aching and his hands were blistered. But the fence was looking better, and he felt a satisfaction he hadn't experienced since selling the ranch. It felt good to be working with his hands again, to be building something useful. Dr. Peterson arrived just after 2 o'clock, driving the same old truck he had been using for 20 years. Harold met him at the gate, and together they walked over to where Hope was standing in the shade of the small shelter. "Well, she's in rough shape, that's for sure," Dr. Peterson said, his experienced eyes taking in Hope's condition. "But she's alert and seems calm. That's a good sign." Harold held Hope's lead rope while Dr. Peterson examined her. He listened to her heart and lungs, checked her teeth, and felt along her neck and back. Hope stood quietly through it all, seeming to understand that this man was trying to help her. "She's younger than I expected," Dr. Peterson said. "Maybe 8 or 9 years old. Good bones, good conformation under all that poor condition. Someone let this horse get way too thin, but the foundation is solid." Dr. Peterson moved to Hope's side and gently examined her swollen belly. He pressed his hands along her flanks, feeling for the position of the foal. Hope turned her head to watch him but didn't seem bothered by his touch. The foal is active, Dr. Peterson said with a smile. I can feel it moving. Based on the size and position, I'd say she's got maybe 3 weeks to go, possibly less. Harold felt a mixture of excitement and terror. 3 weeks to get ready for a birth, to make sure Hope was healthy enough to deliver safely. What does she need? Harold asked. The first week with Hope was both wonderful and terrifying for Harold. Every morning he woke up before dawn, his first thought always the same. Was she okay? He would stumble to the kitchen window in his pajamas and peer out into the paddock, holding his breath until he saw Hope standing or moving around. True to Dr. Peterson's instructions, Harold was feeding Hope as much good alfalfa hay as she wanted. The mare seemed to have an endless appetite, which the vet had assured him was normal for a pregnant horse trying to regain lost weight. Harold found himself making trips to the feed store every few days, each time spending money he couldn't really afford. By the end of the first week, Harold could already see small changes in Hope. Her ribs weren't quite as prominent, and there was a little more shine to her coat. More importantly, she seemed more alert and interested in her surroundings. When Harold came outside each morning, Hope would walk over to the fence to greet him with a soft nicker. The second week brought new challenges. Harold noticed that Hope was spending more time lying down, and when she stood up, it took her longer to get comfortable. Dr. Peterson had warned him that this was normal as the foal grew larger, but it still worried Harold. Every time he saw Hope struggling to find a comfortable position, he felt a pang of anxiety about what was coming. Harold had been researching horse care online, something that would have amazed his younger self. At 73, he was learning to navigate websites and forums, reading everything he could find about pregnant mares and foaling. Most of what he read was encouraging, but some of the stories about complications during birth kept him awake at night. The small chicken shelter was clearly not going to work as a foaling stall. Harold knew he needed to build something bigger and better, but his savings account was already running dangerously low. That's when his neighbor, Tom Rodriguez, stopped by with an unexpected offer. Harold, I've been watching you work on that fence, Tom said, leaning against his truck. I've got some old lumber in my barn from when I tore down my old chicken coop. It's still good wood, just needs to be cleaned up. You're welcome to it if you can use it. Harold felt a wave of relief wash over him. Tom, that would be a huge help. What do you want for it? Tom shook his head. Nothing. Consider it a neighbor helping a neighbor. Besides, I think what you're doing with that mare is pretty special. Not many people would have stepped up like you did. With Tom's donated lumber and Harold's determination, the two men spent the next weekend building a proper foaling stall. It was attached to the side of Harold's small garage, with good ventilation and enough room for Hope to move around comfortably when her time came. Harold's back ached for days afterward, but the satisfaction of having built something with his own hands was worth every pain. Hope seemed to approve of her new accommodations. She investigated every corner of the stall, sniffing and pawing at the clean straw Harold had spread on the floor. That night she chose to sleep in the stall instead of outside, which Harold took as a good sign. Dr. Peterson came back for his follow-up visit at the beginning of the third week. Harold was anxious to hear his assessment of Hope's progress. The vet spent a long time examining the mare, listening to her heart, checking her teeth, and feeling along her sides where the foal was growing. She's definitely put on some weight, Dr. Peterson said approvingly. Her coat is looking better too. You've been taking good care of her, Harold. The praise made Harold feel proud, but he was more interested in what Dr. Peterson had to say about the foal. Based on what I can feel, I think we're looking at maybe another week, 10 days at most, the vet said. The foal has dropped lower, which means it's getting ready. Hope's udder is starting to develop too, which is another sign that birth is approaching. Harold felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. Is she strong enough now? Will she be able to handle the delivery? Dr. Peterson was quiet for a moment, his hand still on Hope's side. She's definitely in much better condition than she was 3 weeks ago. But Harold, I need to be honest with you. Foaling is always risky, and with a mare who was as run down as Hope was, we're not out of the woods yet. There could still be complications. What kind of complications? Harold asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. The foal could be positioned wrong, which would make delivery difficult or impossible without help. Hope might not have enough strength for a long labor. The foal could be weak or underdeveloped. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. Harold looked at Hope, who was peacefully eating hay, seemingly unaware of the serious conversation happening around her. What should I be watching for? Dr. Peterson spent the next hour teaching Harold about the signs of impending labor. Hope would become restless, might pace or lie down and get up repeatedly. Her milk would come in fully, and she might leak a little. Most importantly, Harold needed to know when to call for help and when to let nature take its course. The most important thing to remember, Dr. Peterson said, is that most mares foal just fine on their own. Your job is to watch and only interfere if something goes obviously wrong. And Harold, don't try to be a hero. If things don't look right, call me immediately, even if it's the middle of the night. After Dr. Peterson left, Harold felt more nervous than ever. He had a week or less before Hope would give birth, and despite all his preparation, he felt completely unprepared for what was coming. That evening, he called his daughter Linda in Denver. "Dad, you did what?" Linda's voice was incredulous. "You bought a pregnant horse? At your age?" Harold tried to explain about the auction, about Hope's condition, about how he couldn't just let her go to the kill buyers. But even as he talked, he could hear how crazy it all sounded. "Dad, this is insane. You're 73 years old living on Social Security. What if something goes wrong? What if you get hurt trying to help this horse?" Harold couldn't argue with her concerns because they were the same ones that kept him awake at night. "Linda, I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't live with myself if I had just sat there and let it happen." There was a long pause. Finally, Linda sighed. "Dad, I worry about you being alone out there. Promise me you'll call for help if you need it. Don't try to handle everything by yourself," Harold promised, though he wondered who he would call besides Dr. Peterson. Most of his old ranching friends were as old as he was, and none of them lived very close. As Hope's due date approached, Harold found himself spending more and more time just watching her. He would sit on an overturned bucket outside her stall, sometimes for hours at a time, just observing her behavior. He was looking for any sign that labor was beginning, but mostly he just enjoyed her company. Hope seemed to enjoy his presence too. She would often come over to the fence and rest her head near where Harold was sitting. Sometimes she would gently nuzzle his shoulder or investigate his pockets looking for treats. Harold had started carrying apple slices with him, and Hope always knew when he had them. During these quiet times together, Harold found himself talking to Hope about everything and nothing. He told her about Martha, about the ranch he used to own, about his worries for the future. Hope was a good listener, her ears always turned toward him, occasionally nickering softly as if she understood. "You know, girl," Harold said one evening, as the sun was setting, "I never thought I'd be doing anything like this at my age. Martha always said I was too stubborn to know when to quit, but I think even she would be surprised by this." Hope shifted her weight and rested her chin on the fence rail, her dark eyes reflecting the last light of day. Harold reached up and gently scratched behind her ears, something that always made her close her eyes contentedly. "I'm scared, Hope," Harold admitted quietly. "I'm scared something will go wrong when your baby comes. I'm scared I won't know what to do to help you. I'm scared I've taken on more than I can handle." Hope turned her head to look at him directly, and Harold could have sworn he saw understanding in her expression. She stretched her neck toward him and gently touched his cheek with her nose, the softest of kisses. "But we're in this together, now aren't we?" Harold continued. "You're counting on me and I won't let you down. We'll figure it out somehow." The next few days seemed to drag by endlessly. Harold checked on Hope constantly, looking for any sign that labor was starting. He read and reread the information Dr. Peterson had given him about foaling. He organized and reorganized the supplies he might need: clean towels, iodine for the foal's umbilical cord, a heat lamp in case the baby needed extra warmth. Hope seemed to sense that something was about to happen. She was more restless than usual, occasionally pacing in her stall or lying down for a few minutes before getting back up. Her udder was fuller now, and Harold could see that she was uncomfortable. On a Tuesday evening, exactly 4 weeks after Harold had brought Hope home from the auction, he noticed that her behavior had changed significantly. Instead of eating her dinner hay with her usual appetite, Hope was picking at it half-heartedly. She kept looking at her sides and occasionally pawing at the ground with her front hoof. Harold's heart started beating faster. According to everything he had read, these were signs that labor might be starting. He called Dr. Peterson's office but got the answering service. The vet was at another. Harold must have dozed off in his chair because the next thing he knew, he was jerking awake to the sound of Hope making a low, grunting noise he had never heard before. He looked at his watch and saw that it was just after 3 in the morning. He had been asleep for less than an hour, but everything had changed. Hope was lying on her side now, her legs stretched out straight. Her breathing was faster and more labored than before, and Harold could see powerful contractions rippling along her sides. This was no longer early labor. Hope was actively working to deliver her foal. Harold stood up quietly, not wanting to disturb the mare but needing to see better. Hope seemed completely focused on what her body was doing, paying no attention to Harold's presence. Her eyes were half closed and she was making soft grunting sounds with each contraction. Then Harold saw something that made his heart nearly stop. There was a dark, wet membrane beginning to appear beneath Hope's tail. Dr. Peterson had told him this would happen, but seeing it in person was both amazing and terrifying. Inside that membrane was Hope's foal trying to be born. Harold grabbed his cell phone with shaking hands and called Dr. Peterson. "It's happening," Harold whispered into the phone, not wanting to speak loudly and startle Hope. "I can see the membrane." "Good," Dr. Peterson said calmly. "That's the amniotic sac. The foal should be inside it. Can you see any feet yet?" Harold peered closer. The membrane was getting larger with each contraction, but he couldn't make out any specific body parts yet. "Not yet. Just the sac." "That's normal. Keep watching. The front feet should appear first with the nose right behind them. If you see anything else first, like just the head or the back feet, call me immediately. Otherwise, let Hope do her work." Harold hung up and focused all his attention on Hope. The mare was working harder now, her breathing coming in quick pants between contractions. With each push, the amniotic sac protruded a little further. Harold found himself unconsciously holding his breath and pushing along with her. Then suddenly Harold could see them. 2 small dark hooves pointing downward, just like Dr. Peterson had said they should. Harold felt a rush of relief. The foal was positioned correctly for birth. "Come on, Hope," Harold whispered. "You're doing great, girl. Just keep pushing." As if she heard him, Hope gave a particularly strong contraction, and suddenly the foal's front legs were visible up to the knees. Harold could see the white tips of the tiny hooves and the dark, wet legs above them. It was the most amazing thing he had ever witnessed. Hope rested for a moment between contractions, her sides heaving. Harold could see that she was exhausted, but she wasn't giving up. When the next contraction came, she pushed with everything she had. Now Harold could see more of the foal. The legs were out to the shoulders, and he could just make out the shape of a small head, tucked between the front legs. This was exactly how Dr. Peterson had said a normal birth should look. But then Hope's contractions seemed to slow down. She was still pushing, but not as strongly as before. Harold checked his watch and realized that she had been in active labor for over an hour. Dr. Peterson had said to call if she was straining hard for 30 minutes without progress, but Hope was making progress. It was just slow. Harold found himself talking to Hope, encouraging her like he would have encouraged Martha during a difficult time. "You're doing so good, Hope. Your baby is almost here. Just a little more, girl. You can do this." Hope seemed to hear him. She lifted her head slightly and looked in Harold's direction. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Harold saw determination in Hope's gaze. She was tired, but she wasn't ready to quit. The next contraction was stronger, and suddenly the foal's head appeared fully. Harold could see its small ears plastered against its head and its eyes still closed. The sight took his breath away. This was Hope's baby. the life that had been growing inside her all this time. But now, Hope seemed to be having more difficulty. The foal's shoulders were the widest part, and Hope was having to work harder to push them through. She strained and pushed, but the foal didn't seem to be moving much. Harold started to worry. How long was too long for this stage? Should he call Dr. Peterson back? What if the foal was stuck? Just as Harold was reaching for his phone, Hope gave a tremendous push, and suddenly the foal's shoulders slipped through. Once the shoulders were out, the rest happened quickly. The foal's body slid out in a rush of fluid, followed by the back legs. Harold stared in amazement at the small, wet form lying in the straw behind Hope. The foal was completely still, covered in the remnants of the amniotic sac. For a terrifying moment, Harold wondered if it was alive. Then the tiny chest moved. The foal was breathing. Hope lifted her head and looked back at her baby for the first time. She made a soft, nickering sound, different from any Harold had heard before. It was the sound of a mother greeting her child. Harold called Dr. Peterson immediately. "The foal is born," Harold said, his voice shaking with emotion and exhaustion. "It's breathing, but it's not moving much." "That's normal," Dr. Peterson assured him. "Foals often need a few minutes to figure out what just happened." "Is Hope okay?" Harold looked at the mare. She was still lying down, but her breathing was settling into a more normal rhythm. "She seems tired, but okay." "Good. Now here's what you need to do. First, make sure the foal's nostrils are clear of any membrane or fluid. Sometimes they need a little help clearing their airways." Harold grabbed a clean towel from his supply pile and carefully approached the foal. Hope watched him but didn't seem alarmed. Harold gently wiped around the foal's nose and mouth, clearing away some fluid and pieces of membrane. The foal snorted softly and shook its head. "I cleared its nose," Harold reported to Dr. Peterson. "Excellent. Now, is it a colt or a filly?" Harold had been so focused on making sure the foal was alive that he hadn't even thought to check. He looked more carefully and smiled. "It's a colt, a little boy." "Wonderful. Now, the umbilical cord should break naturally when Hope stands up or when the foal starts moving around. Don't cut it unless it doesn't break on its own. When it does break, you'll need to dip the stump in iodine to prevent infection." As if on cue, the colt began to stir more actively. He lifted his head and looked around with dark, curious eyes. His coat was a dark bay, just like his mother's, but with white markings on his face and legs that Hope didn't have. Hope nickered again and began the process of getting to her feet. It took her several tries, as she was clearly exhausted from the birth, but she finally managed to stand. As she did, the umbilical cord stretched and then broke naturally, just as Dr. Peterson had predicted. Harold quickly dipped the cord stump in iodine, following the vet's instructions. The colt didn't seem to mind the brief contact. "The cord broke, and I got it with iodine," Harold told Dr. Peterson. "Perfect. Now comes the really important part. The foal needs to stand and nurse within the first few hours of life. This can take a while, so don't panic if it doesn't happen right away. But he does need to get that first milk from Hope. It contains antibodies that will protect him from disease." Harold looked at the colt, who was still lying in the straw but was now more alert and active. He was trying to figure out what his legs were for, lifting them one at a time and looking confused when they didn't do what he wanted them to do. Hope had turned around and was now nose to nose with her baby, sniffing him and making soft maternal sounds. She began licking him, cleaning him and stimulating his circulation. The colt seemed to enjoy this attention, making small squeaking noises in response to his mother's care. "Hope is cleaning him," Harold reported. "He's making little sounds." "That's exactly what should be happening. I'll come by first thing in the morning to check on both of them, but it sounds like everything went perfectly. You should be proud, Harold. You helped save 2 lives tonight." After hanging up with Dr. Peterson, Harold pulled his chair closer to the stall and settled in to watch the miracle of new life unfold. The colt was becoming more active by the minute, trying to coordinate his long, spindly legs. Hope was being a perfect mother, encouraging him with gentle nudges and continued cleaning. Harold found himself thinking about names. Dr. Peterson had said it was a colt, a little boy horse. After everything that had happened, after all the uncertainty and fear, He had made it safely into the world. He was Hope's chance for a new life, and Harold's too. Chance, Harold said softly. Your name is Chance, little guy. Because that's what your mama and I both needed. A chance. As if he heard his name, the colt lifted his head and looked directly at Harold with bright, intelligent eyes. Then he went back to the serious business of figuring out how to get his legs underneath him. It took Chance almost an hour to stand up for the first time. Harold watched every attempt, his heart in his throat each time the colt got part way up, only to tumble back down in a tangle of legs. Hope was patient with her son, standing quietly beside him and offering encouragement with gentle nickers. When Chance finally managed to get all 4 legs coordinated and stand up, Harold felt tears running down his cheeks. The colt stood there, wobbling, looking surprised at his own success. His legs were incredibly long and thin, and he seemed amazed that they could actually hold him up. Hope immediately moved closer to her baby, positioning herself so 3 months after Chance's birth, Harold's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. What started as one old man's impulsive decision to save a pregnant mare had grown into something much bigger, something that touched the lives of people throughout their small farming community. The first sign that word was spreading about Harold's rescue came just 2 weeks after Chance was born. Harold was in the paddock, watching the colt run circles around his mother, when he heard a truck pulling into his driveway. He looked up to see Jake Wilson, who owned a small farm about 10 miles away. Jake got out of his truck and walked over to the fence, where he stood watching Hope and Chance with obvious appreciation. Harold, I heard about what you did at the auction. That's a fine-looking colt you've got there. Harold thanked him, but Jake wasn't finished talking. I've got a situation I was hoping you might be able to help with, Jake continued. My neighbor decided to get rid of his horses, and he's not being too particular about where they go. There's an old gelding, probably 25 years old, gentle as a lamb, but not worth much to most buyers. I was wondering. Harold looked at Hope and Chance, then at his small property. Jake, I appreciate you thinking of me, but I don't know if I can take on another horse. Money's pretty tight as it is. Jake nodded understandingly. I figured as much. But I was thinking maybe we could work something out. I've got more hay than I need this year, and my wife has been wanting to help with something like this. What, if we could find a way to share the costs? That conversation was the beginning of what would become an informal network of people who wanted to help horses in need. Jake's wife, Betty, started coming by twice a week to help with the feeding and grooming. She brought her granddaughter with her, a quiet 12-year-old named Amy who was immediately smitten with Chance. Amy had been struggling in school and at home since her parents' divorce, but something about being around the horses seemed to calm her. She would sit for hours just watching Hope and Chance, and gradually she started opening up to Harold about her troubles. My mom cries a lot since Dad left, Amy confided one afternoon as she was brushing Hope. She thinks I don't notice, but I do. Harold didn't know much about helping kids deal with divorce, but he knew how to listen. That must be hard for you to see, he said simply. Amy nodded, continuing to brush Hope's coat with gentle strokes. But when I'm here with the horses, everything feels peaceful. Hope doesn't care if my parents are fighting or if I got a bad grade on my math test. She just likes having me brush her. Harold realized that Amy was getting something from the horses that she couldn't get anywhere else. A sense of peace, of unconditional acceptance. It was the same thing Harold had found when he first looked into Hope's eyes at the auction. Word continued to spread about Harold's small rescue operation. Dr. Peterson mentioned it to other clients, and before long Harold was getting calls from people who had horses they couldn't care for anymore. Most of the time, Harold had to say no. His property was small and his resources were limited, but occasionally when the situation was desperate enough and he could find people to help, he said yes. The second horse to arrive was indeed Jake's neighbor's old gelding, a gentle bay named Rusty who had spent his whole life as a family horse, but was now unwanted because his owners were moving to the city. Rusty settled in easily with Hope and Chance, becoming like a grandfather figure to the young colt. Betty Wilson had convinced her church to donate money for horse feed, and Jake had built a second small shelter on Harold's property. Harold protested that he couldn't afford to repay them, but Jake waved off his concerns. Harold, you're doing something important here. These horses would be dead if it weren't for you. The least we can do is help with some hay and lumber. The third horse came through Dr. Peterson. A client of his had a young mare who had been injured in a fence accident. The wound had healed, but it had left the mare with a slight limp that made her unsuitable for riding. The owner couldn't afford to keep a horse that couldn't be used and was planning to sell her to the auction. I know you don't have room, Harold, Dr. Peterson said over the phone, but this mare is only 6 years old and she's got a lot of good years left. She just needs someone who can appreciate her for what she is, not what she can't do. Harold looked out at his small paddock where Hope was grazing peacefully while Chance played with Rusty. He had 3 horses now, which was already more than he had ever planned for. But the thought of that young mare ending up at the same auction, where he had found Hope, made his chest tighten. What's her name? Harold asked. Grace, Dr. Peterson replied. Her name is Grace. Grace arrived the next week, a beautiful chestnut mare with a kind eye and a gentle disposition. Her limp was barely noticeable unless you knew to look for it, and Harold couldn't understand how anyone could give up such a lovely horse for such a minor imperfection. Grace fit into the little herd perfectly. She and Hope became immediate friends, often standing together under the shade of the oak tree in the paddock. Chance, now bigger and more confident, appointed himself as the official greeter for all newcomers, but with 4 horses, Harold's expenses had quadrupled. Even with donations from Jake and Betty and their church, Harold was struggling to keep up with feed costs, veterinary bills, and basic maintenance. His credit cards were maxed out, and his savings account was nearly empty. That's when Amy Wilson came up with an idea that surprised everyone. Grandpa Jake, she said one afternoon while she was helping Harold feed the horses. What if we had people come visit the horses and pay a little money, like those places where you can pet farm animals? Harold started to explain why that wouldn't work, but Jake held up his hand. Wait a minute, Harold. Amy might be onto something here. Within a month, Jake and Betty had organized what they called Hope's Haven Visiting Days. Every Saturday afternoon, families from town could come out to Harold's place for a small donation and spend time with the horses. Amy acted as a tour guide, telling visitors about each horse's story and showing them how to safely pet and interact with the animals. The visiting days were more successful than anyone had expected. Children who had never been around horses fell in love with gentle Rusty. Adults were moved by Hope's story and amazed at how healthy and beautiful she had become. Teenagers connected with Grace, whose slight limp made her seem more approachable and less intimidating than a perfect horse might have been. The donations from the visiting days weren't enough to fully support the horses, but they helped significantly. More importantly, the visitors often became regular volunteers. A retired teacher named Margaret started coming twice a week to help with grooming. A local businessman donated his old truck to help with hay deliveries. A group of high school students adopted the horse rescue as their community service project. One Saturday afternoon, about 6 months after Chance's birth, Harold was standing by the fence watching a group of children interact with the horses. Amy was in her element, showing a shy little boy how to hold his hand flat when offering Rusty a carrot. Hope was standing patiently while twin girls brushed her mane. Chance, now tall and confident, was showing off for the visitors by running and bucking in the pasture. Dr. Peterson walked up beside Harold and leaned against the fence. You know, Harold, when you bought that mare at the auction, I thought you might be making a mistake. I was worried you were taking on more than you could handle. Harold nodded. I was worried about the same thing. Some days I still am. But look what you've created here, Dr. Peterson continued, gesturing toward the scene in front of them. You've got 4 horses who would otherwise be dead. You've got kids learning about animals and responsibility. You've got a whole community coming together to support something good. That's pretty remarkable for one old rancher's impulse decision. Harold watched as Amy helped the shy little boy successfully feed Rusty a carrot. The boy's face lit up with joy when the old gelding gently took the treat from his palm. Harold remembered his own first experiences with horses as a child, the wonder and excitement of being trusted by such a large, powerful animal. You know what the best part is? Harold said to Dr. Peterson. These horses are teaching people things they can't learn anywhere else. Patience, gentleness, responsibility. Amy comes here every week because her parents are going through a rough divorce and the horses give her something stable to hold on to. That little boy over there is afraid of everything, but Rusty makes him feel brave. Hope has shown all of us what it means to overcome adversity and start fresh. Dr. Peterson nodded approvingly. And what have they taught you, Harold? Harold was quiet for a long moment, watching Hope interact gently with the visiting children. They taught me that it's never too late to start over. That sometimes the most important things we do are the ones that don't make financial sense. And that when you save someone else's life, they often end up saving yours too. As the afternoon wound down and the visitors began to leave, Harold started the evening feeding routine. Hope nickered when she saw him coming with the grain buckets, and Chance trotted over to investigate what treats Harold might have brought. Rusty followed at his more sedate pace, and Grace brought up the rear, her slight limp barely noticeable as she moved across the paddock.